Look! Look, the dynamic duo!
So, hey guys, welcome to the Dynamic Duo. I'm Franz.
I'm Kevin. Welcome back to Avengers Tower and the Batcave. Ladies and gentlemen, the dynamic duo is once again on the job.
That's our intro, and I love it every single time.
Okay.
Kevin, my friend, I couldn't be more excited. We've had a chance to interview some giants in the industry, and it doesn't get bigger than our next guest. We have with us an award-winning legend who has written some of the best, greatest, most impactful stories in the lore of comic books, Kevin. My
Yes,
favorite stories, Kevin. We have with us Steve Englehart, one of the masters in the industries. Please help me welcome Steve to the show.
thank you for being with us, sir. It is more than an honor.
Happy to be.
Kevin, Kevin, before I even ask you a question, I would like for you to share with, well, actually, with everyone, with our audience, what you said when I said that Steve agreed to talk to us.
Mr. Englehart, I want to personally thank you on almost every way that could be imaginable. You have no idea what you mean to me personally and creatively. Mr. Steve, I have cerebral palsy, and about a year ago, I suffered a stroke. But the reason why I'm bringing this up and saying thank you to you directly, and you truly don't know what it means to me, is as a child and throughout my early years, my teenage years, etc., comic books and the world of comics helped get me through a lot of what I've had to deal with. And you, sir, you are one of my biggest influences. You, folks like Neil Adams, Ron Friends, you all kept me fighting. You kept me moving. You made me believe in heroes and standing up and moving forward. And I cannot begin to tell you what this means to me on a very personal and direct level.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. When I wrote these stories, I was pretty much only aware of being on this side of the page, that I was writing stories. I was getting feedback. People were, sending letters with actual stamps and stuff when it started. So I knew people were enjoying the stories, but still, it's only been over the years that people have said, well, I had this situation and the comics helped us out, or I was doing this and so I that's sort of an added bonus for me to know that those books meant something specific to somebody.
Oh, yes, sir. Believe
You
me,
know,
they truly, truly did. And
you've already,
still do during the time that I was in the hospital with the stroke. A handful of your books were with me, and
Uh,
they kept me going even then.
yeah.
well, that's great. That's
I
great.
usually, the first question we usually ask is, do you get it? Do you know the impact that you've had? You've already answered that question, but we do want you to know, and obviously I'm repeating myself and what Kevin said. just how significant, how meaningful your work has done. I mean, it's not just that you're writing good and interesting stories; they impact lives, and I think it's a very beautiful and important thing, and it's important for you to know that, and I hope that you do.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I say, I've learned it over
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Um, uh, so yeah, again, all I can say is I'm happy that it had the stories had those effects and got you to this point.
So let me ask you this. So there's so much to talk about with you because you've done so much in the industry and so much in a very high level. We have to concentrate and focus on a couple of things. But I'd love to start with you, just the beginning. Go brief, like how did you get into the industry? Were you a fan before? What was young Steve like, and how did you get to be a comic writer? I know you started off initially as an artist, but
All right.
how did you get in?
Well, I read comics as a kid, and it was basically the art that most attracted me. When I was a kid, it was in the 50s, and this was not a high point for stories, but there was Dick Sprang doing Batman and
Mhm.
such things. Um, so so in when I got into comics, the first thing you had to do before you even got into comics was move to New York because
Mm.
they didn't have FedEx and they didn't have the internet. So you had to be able to hand things to people. Um, and the cool thing about that was I wasn't a big New York fan. I don't know where you guys are, but I just got to say, but
Where
uh,
were you from, by the way? Where were you coming from to come to New York?
Indiana. Well, I grew up in Indiana mostly and went to college in Connecticut.
Okay.
So I wasn't like unfamiliar with New York, but um, still I do like more grass and trees and so forth than New York had to offer. But the cool thing was that pretty much everybody in comics was there, and so you got to know pretty much everybody in comics, which was very cool. And one of the people I got to know was Gary Friedrich, who you're nodding, you know what Gary did. He was also the low-level editorial guy at Marvel, bottom of the totem pole, but on staff. And a stewardess was murdered in the apartment above his.
Oh,
And his wife, who was from New York, said, I would like to go back to Missouri, where you're from, for the summer, because I don't feel comfortable here with a dead woman upstairs. And so Gary called me up and he said, Hey, you want to sit in for me for 6 weeks while I'm in Missouri? And I almost said no, because I was living 2 hours by train outside the city, 2 hours in, 2 hours out. And the idea of doing that every day didn't appeal, but it was Marvel, and I was trying to, get somewhere. So I said yes. And at the end of 6 weeks, Gary was having such a good time chilling in Missouri that he sent back this story he was supposed to write, um, a little 6-page monster story, but he didn't feel like writing it. So he sent it back and said, get somebody else to do this. And they looked around the office, which was the bullpen, it really was this small group of people.
fascinating.
And they looked around the office and they go, well, you want to write this thing? And to that point, I was an aspiring artist. I had given no thought at all to writing anything, but I said yes. And I wrote it and I liked writing it and they liked what I wrote. So then that started the process. You didn't just, no matter who you were, you didn't just immediately start out doing superhero books, right? They
Of
still had
course.
they still had westerns and monsters and romances. And so I wrote some of each of those over the next 6 months, whatever. Um, and eventually they said, well, okay, want to write The Beast, and then I was off to the races at that point.
That's right.
But it's not a story. I mean, it's a cool story, but nobody's ever gonna like go to that story and go, yeah, that's how I could do it.
But it's almost fate though, if you think about it. It's almost like
Yeah, it
uh,
was, you know. I've said quite often I was in the right place at the right
at the
time.
right time. At
I
the right
mean,
time.
I could do the work. It took me a long time to kind of like accept, yeah, I did do the work because writing turned out to be easy for me. It's like
Interesting.
I'm storytelling is not. turns out is not tough. And so, so much of what I did was like, I'm really enjoying doing this, and it's not toting a bale of hay, you know? I mean, it's like,
Oh, interesting.
so for years, I would just kind of go, well, I just wrote these stories and what the hell. But my wife finally said, you did the work,
Yeah, you
right?
did the work.
You
No,
did the
it's
work.
so easy is a
So,
relative term, right? Because it's
yeah,
easy for you because
yeah.
you're naturally gifted at it. So two questions. How old are you at this time? And give us an idea of what the bullpen was actually like. Like what were the guys like? Roy Thomas was the editor at the time. Is that correct? This is
Yes.
after
Well,
Stanley.
actually, when I started, Stan was still the editor.
He was, okay.
I overlapped by 6 months, and
Oh
then
yeah.
he went to California, and Roy took over, and so most of
Oh,
my time was with Roy. Um, well, to answer your first question, I'll be 78 next month. Uh,
wow.
and so, I mean, yeah, wow, that's what I think too,
No,
because,
what I meant is, wow, you look great. You don't look 78. That's what I
well, I'm
meant.
just, I've got good genes or whatever, but um, what that means is that all this stuff was like 50 years ago, and that's just hard to really comprehend,
Oh,
right?
you're kidding. Yeah, you're right.
I can tell you when you get older, it's like, how could that possibly be? How could I be 78, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Trust me, we're getting older too, so
well,
we're right
everybody
behind
is,
you.
but it's like, well, um, so yeah, this was 50 years ago. And the bullpen, when I was working there, I had the cubicle right at the front of the bullpen area. When you walked in the door at Marvel, there was like a 3 foot entryway, and then there was like a door and a cubicle with a window, and that was me. Just doing the low level stuff, greeting people. People didn't come by, people didn't drop into Marvel all that much. I mean, it was, when I was still in college, I had gone down um, to Marvel. This was 66. And I was still in college. I went down one day and went to Marvel, and they said, "We love you, man, but we have no way to give you a tour or anything." Right? And then I went over to DC, and they also were kind of bemused, but they said, "Well, would you like to talk to Julie Schwartz?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So
Wait,
I went in and talked to Julie and so forth. But I mean, at Marvel, when I was there, I was the guy who said, "Sorry, we don't have anything to do." But people didn't usually drop by the comic book things. It was still there. The conventions were just getting started, right? It was fandom. There were guys in Missouri. Gary
yeah, yeah.
Friedrich was one of them doing, putting out little fanzines and so forth.
That's
But
how Roy Thomas got involved, and yeah.
exactly, yeah, exactly. But there was nothing really. It wasn't like a thing.
Well,
Marvel was doing its books, DC was doing its books, and you read them, and that was the extent of it. But anyway, so I was up front. Right behind me were Johnny Romita and Herb Trimpe. Uh,
Jesus.
they were doing, their own books, but they were also doing art corrections and so forth. Across the aisle that ran up there was me and Romita and Herb on one side. Marie Severin was over on the other side for coloring. A guy named Stu Schwartz was there for doing stats back when they had to do photo stats with all these evil chemicals and stuff that probably took years off everybody's life having to breathe that stuff. Um, and then and behind them, a couple of on-staff letterers, a couple of on-staff colorists who, came and went, but I mean, they were there. And then in the back, there were like 6 to 10 artists if they were like if they wanted to come in and work with other people or that kind of thing. They weren't so much, they were kind of on staff but not really. And then there was an office with a door, and Stan was in there. Right? And so I mean, it wasn't a very big place, but the thing was, again, everybody, we all liked Marvel Comics, and we were all at Marvel Comics doing Marvel Comics, and so there,
Yeah.
the real camaraderie, the bullpen aspect of things. It's very much, if you envisioned what the bullpen was, that's pretty much what it was. I mean, it was a small group of people who were having a good time doing this stuff, and I will say again, I mean, we knew we were doing good comics. We did not know that 50 years later, anybody would care, and that's really true because I was entertaining from my standpoint, I was entertaining people month by month in real time. The idea that, I mean, movies was Stan probably dreamt about it, but nobody else thought anything about movies ever coming out of this, or that it would be there still reprinted 50 years later or any of that stuff. It was just like we were just doing comics because we liked doing comics, and it was paying the bills, and it was like it was fine. But in terms of like a long-term career path or whatever, I never
Oh,
gave that
really?
any
So
thought.
you didn't think of it as a long-term career path. You thought
No,
of it
I
as
mean,
a
I might have. I might, but I'm saying I never thought, oh, well, how am I going to retire? How is this going to work? It's like none of that made any impact on me when I was 25 years old.
yeah, I understand.
Um, so
But was it? Forgive me for interrupting you,
sure.
but so there's and I'm getting your answer. The answer is it's a combination of all things, right? You have work, you have things to do. It's cool because you have the camaraderie with the bullpen,
And
uh,
also
but you
outside the bullpen. I mean, I had good friends, Jim Starlin and Alan Weiss and Al Milgram and all that. And we were all in New York together. Frank Brunner, Steve Gerber. There was a whole
so
bunch of guys. And so, you'd end up partying with people, or you'd all go to the movies together, or you'd do what, I mean, it was like, and while you were doing that, because we were all involved in that business, you'd come out of a movie and you'd go, I got this idea for something that I could do. And they go, yeah, and we could, and it was all, we were young, creative people in New York at the time, and for all I say about New York, I mean, it's a great place to be young and creative, so
it is, it is, it
yeah,
is. I'm
yeah,
from New York, so that's wonderful. And you seem to have a rich sort of interesting background as a conscientious
objector.
objector
Yeah.
with the Vietnam War. You must have been a thinker, and you must have had sort of that rich level of not experience, but thinking that you brought to the comics. Because one of the things I have to tell you, one of the pet peeves that I have is when people think about the classic comics as unsophisticated or as, kiddie stuff. And I always argue that they're absolutely wrong. The stuff that you read in that time period, late 60s, 70s, 80s, is as sophisticated, as complex, as deep as anything that you A might read today or B see on a movie today. And I always reference your work more than anybody else's work. And Kevin, you'll be my witness that
Mhm.
your work on Captain America, oh my gosh. And forgive my excitement, the Celestial Madonna.
Hmm.
Listen, Kevin, you got to say something. I'm blowing up with
It's,
this.
I mean, Franz is right, Mr. Steve. I can't begin to say how many times I've gone through the issues relating to Cap and the Madonna over and over and over again, as well as Batman and the Joker and what have you. Sir, you are a Renaissance man and genius.
Okay. Um,
That must be interesting to hear about yourself.
well, I did, I will say my father was a reporter, so I was always interested in the news, in what was
Mm.
actually going on. And so I took a lot of that stuff in over the years, and I am interested in that kind of thing. Um, so, when I was asked to write Captain America or any of these guys, I just tried to apply everything that I had. I mean, I remember when I would read a comic and I'd go, wow, this is really good, And I'm just sort of filing that stuff away. This was good. This was good. This thing was good. And so I had some sense of a standard when I started to write this thing. I mean, I've said like when I took over the Avengers, I thought Roy Thomas's Avengers was like the best book out there.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, okay, now I got to do that, right? And so I tried, that was my thing. I tried to, like,
What was there any pressure there?
not really. I mean, Roy, um, when Roy and Denny O'Neil were hired by Stan to be his assistants, he grilled them to make sure they sounded exactly like him when they wrote, because he'd been the only voice for most of the time, and he felt rightly or wrongly that voice was what was needed, and if somebody else was going to write these books, they kind of had to get that voice. But then when Roy took over as editor, Marvel was really expanding at the time. They were adding a lot of new books. And Roy basically said, I don't have time to like micromanage everybody. So you guys can do, you're in charge of your own books, We wrote the answers on the letters pages, I mean, in
Wow.
addition to that, but it was like he just said, well, what he said to me when he gave me Captain America, he said, there are two things that have to happen. You have to make this book sell, and you have to turn it in on time every month. And if you can do that, then you can do anything else you want to do. I'm not going to like be on top of it. So, I mean, again, young, creative in New York in the 70s, and now given complete freedom to write whatever that we wanted. And
I
so,
get it.
you got books that were, that sounded like me and, that had my point of view, and you got Gerber's point of view, and you got McGregor's point of view, and you got, nobody was trying to like just totally emulate Stan. We were trying to play ourselves in the universe that had been created by those guys.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I'm
Um,
going to ask you later on because it's an evolution in the comics and in the writing from the Stan Lee birth to your generation to the current generation. I'm going to ask your opinion about the current generation because I think my personal taste is that it's gone too far into the artist's and perception and interpretation of the material without respecting the material. But I'll ask about that later. Here's a question that I'm going to ask, and we'll start with the Celestial Madonna because I'll tell you my experience with that book. So as a young person, right, you read comic books and you appreciate it on a certain level. It's
mm,
fun, it's great, it's exciting. You remember you catalog those books in your mind as something that you loved and enjoyed. Then you grow up, you become an adult, and I being dissatisfied with current and modern comic books, went back to reread the material that brought me joy. And as I'm reading the material, I happen to be reading your run on Avengers. And it's just a casual read. I'm just reading. But the more I'm reading, the more I am absolutely just falling in love with the material that I'm reading because it's so complex. So before we get to the storyline of Celestial Madonna, here's the thing, and I've asked this to other great creators as well, and I've not gotten the full answer completely. The connection in Marvel, what you did with the Celestial Madonna blew me away because it created a full universe. What's happening in Avengers relates to what's happening in the Hulk, and what happened with the Kotati relates to the blue area of the moon, and so that cohesion. How did that cohesion take place? Was it by accident or was it on purpose? Did you talk to, I don't know, Stalin and say, hey, like, what are you doing with Captain Marvel?
yeah.